Now I'm going to go back to my presentation for today because that's much more interesting as far as I'm concerned. I gave you by email the assignment to look at any of the false flags of which you are aware and tell me what is the most absurd element of it. What stimulates your giggle test? Whether you studied it or not, what stimulates your giggle test to any particular event? Joe, do you have one?
But the propaganda that you're talking about, the
Yeah.
over-air, is really to get the American public to cow down and go along with the illusion that you can even have a war that you're describing. I mean, this idea of having a nuclear war is such an impossible form of stupidity. And they've got everybody willing to pay the taxes to keep this military complex funded. And we're bankrupting the country doing it.
I'm inclined to agree with you, but I'm going to have to take it a little further back because we have spent 50 years convincing the American public that the Russians, 70 years, 50 years, let's say, convincing the American public that the Soviets and subsequently the Russians are the hazard. So as long as they see an external enemy,
But how is anybody going to occupy this country?
oh, when you're talking about occupation, I'd have to agree with you entirely. But the American public has not been encouraged to think far enough to think of occupation. They have been thinking in terms of nuclear war, and they've been thinking most recently in terms of winning a nuclear war. But I'm going to go on.
Okay, but do you think they even think about it? Do you think don't most people just say, "Oh, the hell with that"? Where's the beer at?
You
Where's
put
the
your finger
cigarettes?
on the best place to get the pulse, and that is, what are they actually thinking? But I want to take us back 2 or 3 steps. All of these false narratives, whether it's 9/11, the John F. Kennedy assassination, or the Robert Kennedy assassination, or Sandy Hook, or any of a host of others, or Iraq. There are a list of so-called facts that you are given. And I presented one in my email of the entire list of facts that the American public is being presented with concerning Russiagate, concerning the idea that the Russians hacked the computer of the Democratic National Committee and got damaging emails that they shared with WikiLeaks, and that Donald Trump is in collusion with Russia, and that is the reason that so-called damaging information was shared about Hillary Clinton with WikiLeaks. That whole story is full of rotten eggs, or 3-day-old salmon, if you will. The stinkingest egg in that particular basket, to my opinion, is the assertion that the FBI could not examine the DNC computer because the Democratic National Committee refused to give them access and instead had a private contractor evaluate their computer. Now, I'm hoping that simulates your giggle test. Because have you ever known the FBI to want a piece of information and be held up because of a private party refusing access to it? Is that, in your understanding of the real world, is that conceivable?
No, it's
I
not-
would suggest
it's not conceivable.
it's inconceivable to mine. I want you that have studied one or another, whether it's 9/11 or the JFK assassination or anything else that has recently happened, what stimulates your giggle test?
Have you ever sat in front of your own computer screen and watched some so-called service operate your computer while you're sitting there watching it?
I know it happens, but
I've watched that
Yeah.
4 times
Uh-huh.
on my computer, okay? Now, if they can tap into my computer and operate the thing, what's the restriction of any computer in the world of them operating the thing remotely, okay?
Did you ask them for the help?
No.
Or were they just being invasive?
No, the basis for what I'm describing to you?
Oh, okay, I just
Okay,
didn't know
now,
if,
okay, here's what happened the last time. okay?
I believe you, I'm just saying.
No, I'm just telling you.
People have told me it's happened to them,
So
so.
the last time, you know, I couldn't do, my computer wouldn't work. So I think my wife called the, I don't know, Mediacom and they hooked us up to Google and Google hooked us up to somebody else. And all of a sudden, the guy on the other end of the phone is saying, well, you got hacked and we're here to fix it for you,
Oh, yeah.
all right?
Yep.
Okay, so it still boils down, or in the morning when you get up and turn your computer on and it says, punch this button to update. But what the hell's going on when they're updating your computer for you?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so, you know,
I have a view.
you just face the fact that when you turn your computer on, it's a public device that anybody in the world. if
Not
they want-
any, they have to be reasonably smart and reasonably connected, but I understand your point.
You know, so it's a public device that is open for use by people that want to use it.
Somebody last week said that, or I don't recall whether this was the context or somewhere else, they wanted to buy a car that was not subject to being taken over remotely and possibly crashed into as
That was
one.
me.
Well, if you buy a car with a computer, you're going to have a car that has that kind of capability.
Yeah,
If
you
you
need
get
to
a
buy-
carbureted car that does not have fuel injection,
Yeah,
you might be
You
safe.
need to buy a Model T.
Yeah.
You go back and buy a Model T, you're okay.
Or you can buy a Dodge Dart.
Okay.
Does anybody, what else has stimulated the giggle test though? I want to get to,
Well, it's not really funny, but with 9/11, you know, the fact that the buildings fell straight down into their own footprint, and Architects and Engineers for Truth, I mean, science says that's impossible. I mean, and the buildings are hit randomly by planes in different places, but yet they all just fall just like a demolition. And then they're all saying, oh, it's because of the planes. That's one.
that is a very good one.
Are-
And I want, in a little while, I want to play a clip that Ehud Barak gave an interview a few hours after the events of 9/11, because it's very informative. But you're right, if you look at the way all 3 buildings collapsed on 9/11, that even though the deep state was well prepared for that, they had their mouthpieces giving an explanation right off the bat.
And it's so strange that the scientists and the mathematicians, I mean, anybody in that area, any architect or engineer would know that that would be absolutely possible, because there has to be the same amount of force coming from the bottom as for it to fall flat into its own footprint.
Which demonstrates to you how effective the voice of the authority is. When the teacher, who is the voice of the authority, says 2 + 2 is 5, the response of 95% of the students is to say, I never knew that before. And 5% will say, you're nuts. The American public has been spooked. There are several others. One that comes to mind about JFK, one of the reasons that is given for the fact that the Zapruder film of the assassination of Kennedy was never shown in public is that Mr. Zapruder, having seen it, was so appalled by one particular segment that he said, I don't want the public to ever see that. Now, if the deep state or the FBI had wanted the public to see it, would Mr. Zapruder's opinion have made any difference whatsoever? Of course not. The point that I'm making is that I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you to activate your giggle test. Because when you listen to NPR, in this group, NPR is probably the most popular news outlet for the United States. When you listen to NPR, be sure to have your, what Ernest Hemingway said is the best tool for any journalist. He said a good journalist needs a strong, built-in, shock-proof shit detector. I'm asking you to turn your shit detector sensitivity way up. Janet.
I mean, I automatically go back to different things in Serbia, and to us, my ex-husband and I, was the bombing in Sarajevo at the bread line. That automatically, it turns out now you read about it, it was a setup. The Muslims bombed themselves and then blamed it on the Serbs. It was all set up so that U.S. could do a big bombing attack on Serbia. So there you saw it set up, and then afterward we find out they had Peter Jennings like waiting around the corner, waiting to be signaled so he could rush in and show this horrible thing that the Serbs did, so then they can justify attacking the Serbs. So that, in those war situations, that happens all the time. So you're being lied to that this happened when it didn't, and it was the opposite people that were doing it, and so that was my continually through that war.
The same technique of attacking your own forces, or appearing to attack your own forces, to generate sympathy in a different direction is common. The Mossad, or what existed as the Mossad at that time, attacked the synagogues in Iraq in 1947 or 48 with the precise purpose of accusing the Iraqis of anti-Semitism so Iraqi Jews would emigrate to Israel. A case of Jews killing Jews for the precise purpose of establishing a different political movement. And that unfortunately happens all the time. Franklin Delano Roosevelt didn't attack Pearl Harbor. Neither did he defend it. He intentionally and consciously prevented the military personnel at Pearl Harbor from defending themselves because he knew more than 24 hours before the attack on Pearl Harbor where it was going to take place and approximately when it was going to take place. So that technique has been used. It's important to keep that approach in mind. When I suggested you activate your giggle detector, it's not only with respect to that, but with a host of things that occur in history that you need to look at with incredible skepticism, because what you are told by your media has a high probability of not being true, but has a very high probability of being what the ruling elites want you to believe.
So don't you think the illusion of free speech has come to haunt us?
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
As long as Americans think they are free, they can rejoice in their servitude. As long as we have the illusion of freedom. From a legal point of view, Donald Trump could blast this building and kill all of us right now. That is the logical conclusion of the actions taken with respect to the National Defense Authorization Act and the Patriot Act. He does not need a court. He does not need a judge. He can order it.
And that's been true of many presidents in recent years.
Since Bush signed it into law,
Right.
yes.
I don't understand why this is news. I mean, black people have always known that people call us paranoid because we know that we've always been under attack in this country. So it's like, why do people think that?
Because white people have been taught for the last 250 years that white people are smarter than black people, that white people have more political privilege than black people, and then up until recently, white people generally have had more political and economic privilege than black people.
They still do, but okay, I get that part because, but they've been under attack for many years too. And
But they haven't, you have put your finger, getting somewhat astray, but you put your finger on the fact that the most recent tack, the most recent approach that the ruling elite have taken is not to turn black against white, or turn colored folk in the general category, whether you're talking about yellow, brown, or black, against whites. It's been to turn females against males. It's to turn heterosexuals against homosexuals and vice versa. It's to present liberals against conservatives. If the ruling elite can get me to fight another member of the oppressed class, they've won.
well, they always do that.
You're right. And the question in my mind is, will the oppressed minority, which is actually a numerical majority, will the oppressed majority ever recognize where their oppression is coming from? They've been so effectively
Isn't it coming
brainwashed.
from in here?
Pardon me?
I mean, Steve Biko said the most powerful weapon in the hands of our oppressors is our consciousness. So, I mean, doesn't that mean that the source of our oppression that's actually us? Like, you know, wouldn't the best source of our liberation be us?
Yes, but a particular definition of the us. The us that insists on living within the sheepfold and buying along with all of the other sheep and listening to the border collies tell us where to go and what to think. That's not the we that is going to liberate ourselves. The we that is going to liberate ourselves is the we that recognizes our common enemy and recognizes the characteristics of that common enemy and recognizes that we need a functioning, massive majority to do it. I don't know if it was in this group or another group that I pointed out. No, it was at another group. In 2003, millions of people flooded the streets in opposition against the impending war in Iraq. Unfortunately, most of those millions took to European streets, and relatively few Americans took to the streets of New York or Los Angeles or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. If we, being that enlightened we, had brought traffic to a stop in Washington, D.C., and in New York, and San Francisco, and Chicago, and L.A., and allowed ourselves to be arrested in the tens of thousands or millions until the jails were overfilled and still continued to block the streets, we might have been able to stop the Iraq War.
Well, a lot of us, thousands got in the street for the first one. I mean,
Thousands ain't enough.
I hear you, but I think that,
You're right.
okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop so
No,
you can
no.
go on.
You know, if you're gonna go out in the streets, you gotta give up your beer and gasoline.
You got to give up your beer and gasoline. You've got to recognize that the fight is to the death. You've got to recognize that your alternative is slavery. And the vast majority of Americans don't yet believe that. The clip, the dystopian clip, let me play it, although it's not part of my list. Let me get this up here.
I'm not gonna say anything else so you can get.
Is that a promise?
Okay, promise.
Okay. I want to show you something. Does this look okay? That's good enough. This will only take this. This is what the Pentagon is preparing for
The future is urban. By 2030, urban areas are expected to grow by 1.4 billion, with that growth occurring almost entirely in the developing world. Cities will account for 60% of the world's population and 70% of the world's GDP. The urban environment will be the locus where drivers of instability will converge. It is the domain that by the year 2030, 60% of urban dwellers will be under the age of 18. The cities that grow the fastest will be the most challenged as resources become constrained and illicit networks fill the gap left by overextended and undercapitalized governments. The risk of natural disasters compounded by geography, climate changes, unregulated growth, and substandard infrastructure intersect to frustrate humanitarian relief. Growth will magnify the increasing separation between rich and poor. Religious and ethnic tensions will be a defining element of the social landscape. Stagnation will coexist with unprecedented development as impoverishment, slums, and shantytowns rapidly expand alongside modern high-rises, technological advances, and ever-increasing levels of prosperity. This is the world of our future. It is one we are not prepared to effectively operate within, and it is unavoidable. Megacities are complex systems where people and structures are compressed together in ways that defy both our understanding of city planning and military doctrine. It is an ecosystem that demands a highly agile and adaptive force to successfully operate within. Infrastructures will vary radically, with concentrations of high-tech transportation, globally connected air and seaports, contemporary water, utilities, and waste disposal intermixed with open landfills, overburdened sewers, polluted water, and makeshift power grids. Living habitats will extend from the high-rise to the ground-level cottage to subterranean labyrinths, each defined by its own social code and rule of law. Social structures will be equally challenged, if not dysfunctional, as historic ways of life clash with modern living, ethnic and racial differences are forced to live together, and criminal networks offer opportunity for the growing mass of unemployed. This becomes the nervous system of non-nation state, unaligned individuals and organizations that live and work in the shadows of national rule. Where physical domains can be seen, digital domains will have limitless potential to breed and expand without limit. Digital security and trade will be increasingly threatened by sophisticated illicit economies and decentralized syndicates of crime to give adversaries global reach at an unprecedented level. This will add to the complexities of human targeting, as a proportionally smaller number of adversaries intermingle with a larger and increasing number of citizens. The scale and density of these domains is daunting.
I'm going to stop it there. There are a few very important words there. Increasing wealth gap in the presence of vastly increasing prosperity, in the presence of vastly increasing, depressing, and incredible poverty, and the inevitability. Now, I will tell you that in Russia, under the so-called authoritarian rule of Putin and whoever succeeds him, if they follow in the same footsteps, that future is not unavoidable. Indeed, it is going to be avoided very carefully and thoughtfully. That kind of future is not inevitable in China, which is it's avoiding it very consciously as we speak. The Chinese government, through intelligent planning, has brought 800 million people of China out of poverty in the last several decades. So it's only unavoidable if you're talking about the current social economic system evident in the West. Now, if you're talking about unbridled capitalism, such as is exercised in the United States and Western Europe, it is unavoidable. But that's making a very fundamental assumption.
But,
Now,
but most of the countries in Europe, I mean, the northern countries, Germany, are not allowing this to happen. This is only happening here, and
and Great Britain and Germany is at, you are right in observing that they are comparatively slow. But if you look at the several forms of social attack that is being exercised against Germany and the Scandinavian countries, it is happening. It's just happening slower than it is happening in the United States and Great Britain. As long as they follow the EU model and have surrendered their sovereignty to the European Union Congress, it is happening. It's just happening more slowly.
yes, you're correct.
I want to play for you in the context of what is managing Western history. I want to play for you this clip. Now, I've already had to lose it, but let's see what I can do here. This is an interview that Ehud Barak gave a couple hours after the planes hit the buildings on 9/11.
Israeli radio is reporting that senior sources say there was a credible threat. Israeli defense establishment.
Ola, stand by. Let's now hear the words of Yasser Arafat when he heard the first news of the... Right, that's the view from the Palestinian side. Joining me now here in the BBC World studio is the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's in London at the moment. Mr. Barak, welcome to BBC World. First, your reaction, having heard what's happened. At least 4 planes have been hijacked, and there may be more.
The world will not be the same from today on. It's an attack against our whole civilization. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. If it is a kind of Bin Laden organization, and even if it's something else, I believe that this is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror. The same kind of struggle that our forefathers launched against the piracy on the high seas.
In your position as Prime Minister, Defense Minister, also formerly in the Army, were you ever aware of any incident planned like this?
Not in the dimensions, but different elements where clearly there was an attempt on the Twin Towers a few years ago. There was an attempt to explode the Holland Tunnel leading into Manhattan. But of this size and a simultaneous attack, I don't think that anyone had predicted it in advance.
Is it something that security services, intelligence services could ever have got wind of?
I'm not sure, but this is not the case. It really happened in front of our eyes, and the question what should be done in regard to it in order to avoid it in the future. It's going to be a tough struggle. There will be many tough and painful moments along the way, but I believe that if we will coordinate diplomatic, operational, intelligence, and economic activities that will not let them land at any airport and will isolate automatically any nation that is ready to host terror or support them. By doing this consistently along 6 or 10 years, we will reduce dramatically this challenge to all our way of life.
Your words, Mr. Barak, are very similar to the words used to justify missile defense in the United States, which may have taken another 10 or 15 years. Here we've seen low-tech, hijacked, by those with evil intent?
Yeah, I believe that it's, first of all, missile defense is also something which is clearly needed as long
It
as
doesn't
there are
stop something like this, does it?
rogue states, and it should be done, and it should be deployed maybe not on national level, but only on trans-regional level to cover exactly the threat from rogue states like Iran, Iraq, or Libya. But in this area, we will suffer. It will not be so easy to go aboard an airplane in the near future, but we have no way but to stand firm facing terror. Otherwise, all our way of life will be threatened. And to stand firm means to isolate from the world every nation that is hosting them and calling every terror thug with the accurate name and be ready with all the pains that come with it to act upon our observations.
What price might democracy have to pay, given what has happened in the last 3 hours in the United States, given what you're experiencing now in Israel, in the center of Jerusalem, from your own citizens now, with the bombing over the weekend?
There is no shortcuts. You know, our civilization is already highly vulnerable. Look at the entrances into the gates of boarding airplanes. It's a situation where it's not easy. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. But then,
I wanted to show you that, and it's a subtle point. Whereas the American newscasters were focusing on Al-Qaeda as the terrorist organization, Mr. Barak is focusing on terror-sponsoring states. And there's little doubt in my mind that elements of the deep state in the United States and elements of the Israeli government were involved in the attack of 9/11. The very fact that Mr. Barak is focusing on terror-sponsoring states suggests to me that he's had a chance to think about this well in advance and put Iraq, Iran, and he said Egypt, but I think he meant Syria.
He said Libya.
Tom?
He said Libya too.
Well,
Libya? Okay.
if anything should trigger hysterical laughter, it should be this, because Ehud Barak was one of the principal architects of the 9/11 attacks. He himself was directly involved in it, as well as Netanyahu. It's the classic story of the guy accusing his enemy of exactly what he's been doing.
As a follow-up to that clip, I want to show you three. I'm not going to play all of them by a long shot, but I want to show you three segments. Let's see. This is your vice president addressing AIPAC a few days ago.
Members of the United States Congress, Israeli ministers, members of the Knesset, distinguished guests, to all who have come from near and far, it is great to be back at AIPAC, the largest and most influential gathering of the Friends of Israel in the United States of America. And tonight, I bring greetings from a friend of mine and a great friend of the state of Israel, the most pro-life president, the most pro-Israel president in American history, the 45th president of the United States of America. I bring greetings from President Donald Trump. You know, thanks to the President's leadership, the alliance between America and Israel has never been stronger. Friendship between our peoples has never been deeper. And I stand before you today on his behalf to convey a simple message. America stands with Israel today, tomorrow, and always.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
It is great to be here tonight. I want to thank all of you for being here, the great leadership of AIPAC. Bought them a house in Florida. And every winter they drive from Brooklyn down to Florida. My father never played golf. He took up golf. They'd see their friends who moved there. But as they got older, they ran out of things to do. He couldn't play golf anymore. His legs went bad. Their friends were passing on. So those of you from Florida know that Florida Atlantic University, hello Florida, way down there in the south part of the convention center. Anyway, Florida Atlantic University lets every senior citizen enroll in any course for free. So my dad and mom would roll up to Florida Atlantic University every Thursday at 4 p.m. because they enrolled in the course called humor. Now, what was the course called humor? Some erstwhile comedian who never made it in the Catskills would get up and tell jokes for 45 minutes. A different comedian each week. My dad never went to college. He said, gee, college was pretty easy. I should have gone. But each week they called me back with their favorite joke. Here's one of the favorites. Mrs. Goldfarb is brought before the judge. The judge rolls his eyes and said, Mrs. Goldfarb, you're back. Yes, Your Honor, I'm back. And what did you steal this time, Mrs. Goldfarb? I stole a can of peaches from the supermarket down the road. The judge is exasperated. He says, look, Mrs. Goldfarb, I know you're a kleptomaniac, and I know that this is an illness, and I know you could easily afford a can of peaches, but for Lord's sake, Mrs. Goldfarb, this is the 17th time you've been brought before me for shoplifting this year, and it's only March. I have no choice. I got to sentence you to some time in jail. Now, how many peaches were in the can? Your Honor, there were 4 peaches in the can. And I have no choice. I'm going to sentence you to 4 nights in jail, 1 for each peach. He's about to bang the gavel and pronounce sentence, when in the middle of the courtroom, a man gets up, all agitated. Your Honor, he says, may it please the court, I'm her husband. She also stole a can of peas. So when you all retire, you can go to Delray Beach, enroll in the course called... But let me begin by addressing the issue of peace. Many wonder, why don't we still have peace in the Middle East? Even though a majority of Israelis want peace and believe, like I do and most of you do, that there should be 2 states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Now some say, there are some who argue the settlements are the reason there's not peace. But we all know what happened in Gaza. Israel voluntarily got rid of the settlements there. The soldiers, Israeli soldiers, dragged the settlers out of Netzarim, and 3 weeks later the Palestinians threw rockets into Sderot. It's sure not the settlements that are the blockage to peace. Some say it's the borders. Oh, Israel wants different borders. But they forget, during the negotiations in 2000, Ehud Barak was making huge territorial concessions that most Israelis didn't like. It was Arafat who rejected the settlement. It's not the borders.
I don't know how he is in bed, but he certainly is a good liar otherwise. Last prostitute I want to expose you to is this one.
Thank you. It's so many fun to be able to say AIPAC. I am with friends. Nations, we sometimes don't have many friends. I remember last year when we had the vote about America's principled opposition to the Castro dictatorship in Cuba. The vote went against us, 191 to 2. The only 2 no votes, you guessed it, were the United States and Israel. But I always say, quality is more than quantity. Shortly after the 2016 election, President-elect Trump called me to talk about serving in his administration. We had a meeting at Trump Tower, and we had some good discussions about a variety of issues. Long story short, his team called me a couple of days later and said he'd like me to serve as ambassador to the United Nations. I said, I'm a governor. I don't know anything about the United Nations.
Fortunately, she didn't need to know anything about the UN. I wish that was the extent of American servitude to the nation state of Israel, but it's not, so I'm going to play an extended clip from Brzezinski. Where's Brzezinski's area?
Can I ask a question, or am I still banned?
You were never banned, you were being polite. Go ahead.
Well, why do you say servitude to Israel instead of the other way around?
Repeat, I didn't-
Why isn't it, like, since, doesn't the US have the bigger, aren't they the bigger club, or why isn't it Israeli servitude to the US that you say?
I could start to answer that, Demita, but I think Brzezinski will do a better job of answering it. So let me play the clip and see if it...
I'm joined by Mark Brzezinski, publisher of MiddleEast.org. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark.
Thank you.
So obviously Hagel's comments blew up in the mainstream media, not surprising at all. First of all, why is it so taboo to admit that this lobby has influence? And secondly, why is it so taboo to say that first and foremost, if you're a public servant, that your allegiance is for this country instead of Israel?
You know, the idea that mentioning the Israeli lobby, the Jewish lobby, I've called it the Israeli Jewish lobby in print for a long time. For those of us that have followed this for decades, we're looking and we're kind of laughing. Everybody knows there's this powerful lobby, just like everybody knows there's global warming. But there are certain things you can't really deal with in Washington. They're third rails, they're taboo subjects. It's not the mention of them, that's not the problem. It's the standing up to them. It's not letting them always dominate. It's voting against them. It's speaking against them. Journalists are ostracized. Presidents are ostracized. Remember what was President Carter? How he had to pull back when they were insisting on American policies being what they wanted and not what President Carter wanted. Think to the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Bill Fulbright was pushed out of town. Chuck Percy was pushed out of town. So there's a long history to this. Hagel's problem is not that he mentioned the subject. Hagel's problem is that he occasionally stood up to them.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate, really, that this is the situation. But you know, when Hagel was a senator, he signed an aid package, $40 billion worth of aid to Israel. At the same time, Israel is violating international law. I mean, it seemed pretty pro-Israel to me. What really stipulates not being pro-Israel enough?
Look, let's just call it straight. I've been in Washington a long time. My first job when I first came here right out of grad school was to represent the World Jewish Congress. But it wasn't today's World Jewish Congress. It was the World Jewish Congress of the Internationalists, of Dr. Nachum Goldman. So I've been involved in this for a long time. They rely on intimidation. They rely on blackmail. They rely on letting people know that if you cross them, your career's in jeopardy. They do it with journalists, they do it with politicians, and they've been extremely successful because it's not just AIPAC, AIPAC is just the tip. That's just the public. You've got the President's Conference of major American Jewish organizations. You've got the American Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee. You've got Commentary Magazine. You've got two think tanks, one with the Republicans and the hardliners, the Near East Institute, the other, the Saban Institute with the Democrats. It's a whole range of interlocking and interworking organizations. But where did it start from? It started from the Holocaust. It started from Jewish impotence in the 30s and 40s, and what happened to the Jewish people in Europe, and then the fight in the 40s over whether or not the U.S. would support the creation of a Jewish state. Everybody's forgotten the biggest person in foreign policy, General Marshall, opposed it. He even told President Truman that if you, President Truman, support the creation of a Jewish state, it will be unending war in the Middle East, it will be against American interests, and I, your Secretary of State, am going to resign. He threatened to resign over this.
Wow.
So this fight's been going on for a long time.
But how did it evolve to become so powerful and strong? People tell me all the time the Jewish lobby is really the ones running the show in Washington. How much, can you give us a sense on how much influence they really wield on Washington politics and actual policies that are implemented?
A lot of people will find this hard to believe, but to answer your question honestly, as I've come to experience it, when it comes to matters relating to Israel, matters relating to the Middle East, their influence is almost total. They have such ways of manipulating the press and politicians and of forcing people, and they've got many fallback positions. Sometimes it appears they don't get their first goal, but they've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 other goals that are all acceptable to them. And it's not just American Jews, by the way. CUFI, Christians United for Israel, which AIPAC helped organize 7 years ago, is an extremely powerful force in this country, and their convention is even larger than AIPAC's convention when they hold it at the Washington Convention Center these years.
Well, you just reminded me of Philip Zelikow in 2004 when he was speaking to AIPAC, former foreign intelligence advisor, of course, under Bush, who said, "Why would Iraq attack America or use nuclear weapons against us?" I'll tell you what I think the real threat is, and actually has been since 1990. It's the threat to Israel. So here...
Brzezinski is right on a whole lot. He's wrong when he says it started with the Holocaust and Jewish impotence. It was the report of the Holocaust that gave Jewish publicity a great deal of political power. Unfortunately, the Holocaust was created in the United States long before it was created in Germany or in Poland. And that goes back to the studies we've already dealt with, in that Americans were convinced of a mythic Holocaust before any numbers were accumulated, before any gas chambers were investigated, and the personnel at the Nuremberg Tribunal were confident that an extermination plan was attempted long before anything was established. In fact, nothing per se was established at Nuremberg. But we don't have time to detail all of the factors that go into that. Suffice it to say that a horror was generated in the minds of American Jews when they heard about concentration camps and the persecution of Jews, and that horror became a reality that was substantiated at Nuremberg, so that nothing was forensically demonstrated, but they had a lot of angry and terrified people passing judgment on German officers. Now, I want to compare that situation of Jewish impotence being transformed into Jewish political power at the end of World War II, and talk with you, or share with you rather, a speech that is given by Gideon Levy at a conference comparing the mentality of Israeli Jews to other human beings today, and whether this is very similar to what was experienced by Germans in the 1930s. And the point that I am making is that you have dysfunctional thinking in both cases. You have thinking that is determined by propaganda in both cases, and thinking that is socially destructive in both cases. Gideon Levy is a journalist for Haaretz. I wish journalists would learn to say that correctly, because it's not Haaretz or Haaretz, it's Haaretz. Be that as it may, Gideon Levy attempts to tell Israeli Jews the truth. And he enjoys a great deal of journalistic freedom. He enjoys a great deal more journalistic freedom in Israel than the vast majority of journalists do in the United States. But he experiences a certain kind of social circumstance in Israel that is terribly dispiriting to him. And I'm going to play an extended segment of this because he is a brilliant and great human being. I'm going to pass over Mark Grant's intro.
It's my third time here with those wonderful people, and a third time, on one hand, I feel so much at home. I know so many faces. You all get younger, I get older. You all get more energized and more devoted, and I get more and more desperated. But it put me also on a challenge, because already in my second time here, I started my speeches, as far as I can recall, with the concern that I'm going to repeat myself and bore you to death. Because by the end of the day, I'm a singer of one song, and you've heard it already. But the organizers were sophisticated enough this time, and they gave a very strange title to my speech, which doesn't enable me to sing my song. I have to fit to a new song. So I do my best, but I'm really, really so grateful for all the wonderful people who brought me here, and Catherine, my partner. This day was so interesting for us, so enriching. In Hebrew we have this expression, we came to strengthen and we came out strengthened. And this is what I feel after a conference like this. This maybe you are holding the key for any kind of change, for any kind of hope. Because as I'll try to claim later on, the hope for change within Israeli society is so limited, is non-existent. And when the United States is still so crucial, people like you really can make the difference. People like you can really be a game changer, and I mean it. It was never before that Israel and the United States shared the same values like in those days. The only place on earth that Donald Trump is beloved, admired, adored, and appreciated is Israel. The only place that Benjamin Netanyahu is admired, adored, beloved is the United States. If this is not shared values, what is shared values? Some of my ex-best friends are on their way now to the real thing, to the APEC conference, which will start on this weekend. Politicians, journalists, to what I call as the annual drug dealers conference. They will discuss how many more drugs will they send to the Israel occupation-addicted state, how much more friendship will they express, and how much more money and weapons will they supply. And I can tell you, in the United States, as an Israeli, we don't have a bigger enemy than the Jewish lobby. We don't have a bigger enemy for justice, for peace, for equality, than those who think that if you supply the drug addicted with more drugs, you are his friend. That if you support him blindly and automatically, whatever he does, you are a friend. No, my friends, those are not friends, those are enemies. And I can't tell you how happy and proud I am to be here today and not there tomorrow. Thank you. The title of my lecture speaks about Zionism. And Zionism is one of the two religions of Israel. And as religion, as any religion, you can't question it. The second religion is obviously the religion of security. So between Zionism and security, anyone in Israel who dares to raise any kind of question marks is immediately perceived as a traitor. It's impossible to describe you what does it mean to say that you have some questions about Zionism. Imagine yourself if you question today the other religion, if you claim that the Israeli IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are not the most moral army in the world. Let's say they are the second moral army in the world. How dare you? We are getting it with the milk of our mothers, even though my mother was not such a Zionist, I think. But it's very hard to understand from the outside how an ideology became part of the DNA. How an ideology became something which must be taken for granted and there is no room for any question marks. I know it about myself. I know how I grew up. I know what I thought about those very, very, very few who claim that they are not Zionists or, God forbid, anti-Zionists. They were the Satans, even though they were Jews and Israelis. I don't recall one example on earth in which an ideology is so totalitarian, is so saint, is so holy that you have no right to put any kind of doubts, question marks, nothing, not about the past, not about the future, not about the present, nothing. It's unbelievable when you live in a state in which if you declare that you don't accept this ideology, you are not part of the place. You are not part of society. You have no place there. Go to Gaza, go to Damascus. Don't stay here. And this leads me to the title. Because when it comes to Zionism, and friends, we have to face reality. When it comes to Zionism, there is no difference in Israel between left and right. When it comes to the occupation, which is part and parcel of Zionism, there is no meaningful difference between left and right in Israel. And when I mean left and right, I mean the so-called Zionistic left, Labor and others, and the right-wingers. The difference is only by rhetorics. So those of you, and I know some of my Israeli friends who bought already some champagne bottles, ready to open them the moment that Benjamin Netanyahu will be impeached or even go to jail, and they will celebrate how Israel is coming from darkness to light, how freedom and peace is around the corner because we got rid of the tyrant, the right-winger, the fascist, and after this the light is around the corner. As usually, I have bad news for you.
I'm going to stop there. There are several things that are worth noticing, and I have the greatest of admiration for Mr. Levy. Brzezinski says that when it concerns the Middle East and Israel, the control of AIPAC and the Jewish lobby is absolute. And he's right. And Gideon says the prospects of change of the mentality of Israeli Jew is non-existent because of the ideology of Zionism, the ideology of bitachon, security. I would like you to perform the experiment and ask, is this not what we also have in the United States? Can you, in polite society, can you question the evil of Vladimir Putin? I would submit that you can't. When Mr. Levy is talking about a small section of Israeli society rejoicing when Netanyahu is indicted, is that any different than the small section of American population who's looking forward to the day when Donald Trump is impeached? And when Netanyahu disappears and when Donald Trump disappears, nothing is going to change. I commend to you, you can find this on YouTube, Gideon Levy and IRMEP, IRMEP conference. All of these are available on YouTube. I encourage you to read the entire, to watch the entire thing. I don't want to abuse your time this afternoon, or I continue to show it. I'm going to turn the lights on now and open up the questions with the encouragement that you look at the absolute control that the Zionist lobby has over American Middle East policy and ask yourself, is there anything, A, that we can do about it, and is this not a form of fascism? Fascism is being encouraged by our government in the Ukraine. It's being funded. Fascism in India, under the title of Hindu fascism, is being funded under the government of Modi. Whether they are fascistic elements or not is certainly open to debate, but certainly right-wing politicians are gaining the ascendancy in several European countries precisely because the middle-of-the-road political parties are simply following the European Union lead. They have chosen to abandon national sovereignty. And guess what? The citizens of those various countries are saying, you're not doing anything for us. The Greeks are being impoverished. The Italians are being impoverished. The Spaniards are next. And fascism does not have to come with jackboot shoes and a Heil Hitler salute. It can come with the claim and demand for national unity against a foreign enemy, or even worse yet, against an internal enemy. You know, like heterosexual white men, or you name the victim group. Thank you for your attention. I'm going to turn the lights on and we'll open up the questions because I'm not sure Mr. Gruzanski answered Damita's question. So if you can bring it back from your memory banks, I'll see if I can tackle it.
Well, I don't have a problem with the reality of fascism in the United States. But I wonder, like, I mean...
Well, remember, I didn't wear my hearing aid, Damita, so you
Oh, really? Well, I just think that, I think that last comment was probably to provoke me in terms of white males being the victims.
Not actually, but go ahead.
But because there are, I was having a discussion with a friend this morning about how the American population is being groomed to be Gestapo. They're being groomed to put each other in concentration camps.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, and this grooming has allowed the white middle class to look on while, you know, 800,000 black people were locked up for things that aren't illegal. So,
Agreed.
I mean, so that's the grooming.
Not only locked up, but also put into
Well,
into servitude. That is, they are
I
not
know,
merely
I know,
locked up, they are
I
put
hear you.
into chain gang, they are made to produce labor.
I saw
for-
13th, I read Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow. Did you read the new Jim Crow? You should read the new Jim Crow. But here's the thing. The grooming has been going on for a long, long time. And I heard your point earlier that, you know, I don't believe that, a lot of us don't believe that enslavement is a part of this situation here. But it seems to me that this desensitization to our own enslavement has been going on for a long time. And the only people who have really been making a fuss about it is us. It's like, and I think that the privilege that you've been given, that's the trade-off. You know, you don't.
You're suggesting we've been bought off.
Yes, but with this so-called privilege, but now that your class is being really openly, neoliberalism has attacked you ruthlessly, and to the point where they don't give a shit about the middle class anymore, and you really do actually see this crystallization of this 1%, and now I hear some of my white friends go, oh, the middle class is dead. I'm like, thank God, you know, join the club. Yes.
Now, if that realization causes black people and white people and male and female to gather together to recognize the one oppressing subgroup, I would agree with you. If that causes some subgroup of the oppressed class to say, thank God that you're finally getting a taste of it, that's an understandable intermediate position, but it's a self-destructive final conclusion.